Independent Electoral Commission has officially launched the upcoming local government elections campaign. In fact, IEC Chair Glen Mashinini says the Commission is technically ready to conduct the poll and that all health protocols will be observed. He's added that while the IEC is sensitive to the dangers of the pandemic, the poll must be held within 90 days of the expiration of the 5-year term of local government. Meanwhile, a review panel headed by former Deputy Chief Justice Glen Mashinini to determine whether the poll can be free and fair is yet to be completed. Let's get you some analysis on this issue now. Political analyst Ongama Mtimka joins us now. He's in the Eastern Cape this morning. Ongama, it's great to have you with us on the show. I mean, all things considered, it's the right decision from the IEC, but, you know, we'll have to see what the pandemic is like, what stage of the pandemic we're in come October 27th.
Good morning to you, Michelle, and your viewers. I think the IEC must be commended for one thing here. Ever since the concerns arose around about last year about the correctness of holding the elections, they have been very consistent in their messaging that if it does get postponed, it will not be as a result of the failure of the Electoral Commission itself to get ready. And in fact, they have said one consistent message that they are ready to run the election. They are not oblivious to the risks, but are balancing between the constitutional provisions of, a limited term of government and the democratic right that South Africans have to hold elections. I think that yesterday's speech was the most confidence-inspiring for me, in the sense that, one, they are holding the line. Two, they are showing that, one, they've noted the international experience with elections. Two, they have had a multidisciplinary planning process that takes into account disaster management and health. Three, they have noted the experience from the by-elections that they have run. So for me, that was confidence-inspiring in the sense that it's showing due consideration for the kind of crisis we are in, while not easily wanting to renege on the demands for democracy for its sake in South Africa, as the political parties have done.
I mean, in the event of the country not being able to go ahead with the local government elections, as you say, the IEC has gone ahead, it's forged ahead with preparations. It is ready to conduct the elections come the 27th of October. If anything else outside of their control happens, that's an entirely different conversation. But how would that unfold?
Absolutely. So by them being very strong on the message around readiness, about how they've taken consideration of the key issues in terms of risk concerns, they are limiting a decision on two things. What he started with, that the extent of freeness and fairness, which, by the way, is another issue over and above the issue of term limits. But their argument is that that is not defined well in the Constitution. So this work that former Deputy Chief Justice is busy with is going to show, one, the parameters for defining freeness and fairness. Two, the extent to which considerations about the extent to which the election can be free and fair weigh on the viability of holding an election. And I think that one consideration here that needs to be, it's going to be difficult to show how unfree it can be without, for example, considering the fact that political parties too can adopt new ways of doing things, as has happened in the economic and the social spaces. They cannot claim to be bigger than all the other socio-economic and socio-political actors. So that's one consideration. The other one would be a political consideration which might, for example, consider some of the issues that political parties have been saying, but it will take a lot for that because, one, the IEC itself has maintained the line that it has. For political considerations to be made, it would take other avenues which may border on the realm of the constitutionally ambiguous.
Ongama, what plays in our favor here, and I want to talk about, the issue that you brought up around smaller, perhaps, political parties in particular being disadvantaged, or so they argue, with us going ahead with these elections. But what benefits us here is that the IEC, according to that briefing yesterday, has studied how at least 100 other countries have conducted their election in the midst of COVID-19, and so we can take those lessons and apply it to us where possible.
Absolutely. The elections, as the Electoral Commission said, are not about political parties, nor are they about the Electoral Commission itself. They're about the choice that South Africans need to make in that. Now, to what extent does the political parties' competitive offering to South Africans through campaigns? Mm-hmm. Because remember, by virtue, campaigns only help in the decision making of citizens, which what elections are about. To what extent are they vital? To such an extent that the lack of ability to run campaigns would have a greater weighting on whether a decision is made about holding an election over and above the constitutional provisions themselves that limit terms. And to what extent does freedom to campaign? I know that we've factored in, so for example, we take note of intimidation and blocking of others when campaigning. So campaigning is important as far as freedom is concerned, because that's where we political parties, whether or not they've been able to campaign freely or the sitting regime has used intimidation tactics, whatever the case may be. So those are undemocratic. That can lead to some backsliding, as it were. But when there isn't a politically motivated, interruption to campaigning, and political parties are compelled to do things the same way that other social, political, and socio-economic institutions have adapted, then, in my view, it's going to be interesting what finding is around the extent of the unfreeness of the election as a result of limitations for campaigning.
Yeah, but I mean, surely smaller political parties do have a point here. I mean, bigger parties like the ANC, like the Democratic Alliance, perhaps you could also argue the economic freedom fighters as well, might not have that need to campaign as much as smaller parties do ahead of the elections. Surely they have a point that it could well affect their overall gains come October 27th?
At face value, yes, right? Because if you look at, for example, brand equity theory, so those parties, the bigger parties, have got significant brand equity to the extent that, I mean, they are known, right? But let's assume that a room to campaign was open. What is it that small parties could do in a free environment to campaign, which they cannot do now? My argument would be that it's very little, because campaigning is a matter of resources more than anything. And those resources are constrained, whether the environment is as it is currently or there was no COVID-19. So the point then for me, the extent to which it has a bearing on their campaigning activities is limited, because anyway they would have needed to rely a lot more on social media platforms, given the constrained budgets that they have anyway, and also to some degree of contact. And that contact is what every other social institution has learned to manage so far.
I want to just ask you one final question, and we've discussed this before on the show. Your predictions for the outcomes of these local government elections. As I'm speaking to you now, we're in the midst, once again, of rolling blackouts. Eskom talking about a whole range of, some of them new generating units that are out of service this morning. The past few weeks, seeing some of the largest examples of corruption as revealed by the SIU taking place in the midst of a pandemic. Allegations, serious allegations against the health department and the health minister himself. Just a couple of examples there on how that might impact the governing party in its gains or losses at the polls. What do you reckon?
Notwithstanding some of the excitement that's come as a result of the stinging operations, if one can call it that, from the SIU, from the NPA, and this nice momentum that's building at that level, unfortunately, it comes too late, and in my view, the ANC in this election is going to battle to reverse the downward trend that it's seen. If anything, the war with itself, issue with the party is going to affect it a lot more in elections, because remember that they tend to decampaign. The ANC tends to decampaign each other in elections as a result of divisions within the party. Democratic Alliance, unfortunately, I doubt that it's going to reverse the downward trend either. The EFF, I think they're being careful again in terms of their messaging, which then helps them separate themselves from the ANC. Otherwise, if they continue that thing of reframing the party in ANC politics, it might just confuse its own voters and prospective voters. And as it happens, Michelle, with every successive election, whatever tiny fraction of young voters, they always shift an election in the sense that their voter behavior is not tied to liberation movements in a sentimental way as their parents are. So if the EFF plays things carefully here, it might just be the only one of the big three that sees a marginal growth.
Very interesting analysis indeed. Ongama Mtimka, thanks very much for joining us. He's live to us there from Gqeberha this morning.